Namaste. Hearty greetings from Vedanta House in Bindweide. Welcome back to our online classes. I hope everybody is safe and in sound health. Before I begin, I would like to thank you all for your continued interest and participation. Today's class is again part of our series on Vedanta and Dharma. And as usual, it will be for an hour's time. So let's begin with the invocation. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. Om. May the Divine protect us. May the Divine bestow upon us the fruit of knowledge. May we obtain the energy to acquire knowledge. May what we study reveal the truth. May we bear no ill feeling towards one another. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Our last two classes were devoted to a study of the various forms and degrees of bhakti. First of all, there is this broad division of bhakti into lower and higher bhakti. Apara bhakti and para bhakti. As we saw, apara bhakti is also called Vaidhi bhakti, or practice of devotion to God according to rules and procedures laid down in the scriptures. It is more practice of devotion to God according to rules and procedures laid down in the scriptures. That is called Vaidhi bhakti. And then we have para bhakti, which is also known as Prema Bhakti, the experience of supreme love of God. So, Apara Bhakti is practice of devotion, whereas Para Bhakti is experience of supreme love. That is a big difference. Then we also saw how Apara Bhakti itself consists of three different levels: Bahya Bhakti, Ananya Bhakti, and Ekanta Bhakti. External devotion, exclusive devotion to one's chosen deity, and single-minded, one-pointed devotion to God. These are the three levels of Apara Bhakti. When these are cultivated and practiced with faith and over a long period, all this is supposed to lead to the experience of Prema Bhakti, or supreme love of God, Apara Bhakti. This path of devotion assumes that the ultimate source of everything is a single supreme personality, or a person who is perfect in every way. Bhakti Yoga is based on this idea. And because this Supreme Person is all perfect, He should be the object of our adoration and love. That is what devotees feel. That is how they feel. Devotees believe that this Supreme Person is not only all perfect, but that He also responds with grace to our prayers. That is why we pray to Him. Long ago, we heard that according to Vedanta, though God is one and one only, He appears as many, God being infinite. Conceptions and ideas about Him are also infinite. He is absolutely formless, but He also appears through an innumerable variety of forms. He is not limited by any quality that may be attributed to Him. And still, He is the source and support of all those attributes or qualities. So as Sri Ramakrishna says, this Supreme Person, God, He is personal and impersonal, both. He can be both. And many things more, Sri Ramakrishna says. As the personal God with attributes, that is, Saguna. As the personal God with attributes, He is usually worshipped through names and forms. That makes Him also Sakara. Saguna, Sakara. But some devotees also worship Him as without form. Nirakara. Saguna, Nirakara. So in Hinduism, there's a diversity of belief in one or another aspect of God. Some hold that God is formless and attributeless. That is to say, Nirakara and Nirguna. Some believe He is formless but has attributes. Nirakara, Saguna. Some others think God has infinite forms and attributes. Sakara, Saguna. These are the three main conceptions of God in Hinduism. The bhakti that we have studied, that we have discussed until now, with all its different bhavas, attitudes, Shanta, Kanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, Madhura, all this is devotion to God with form and attributes, to a Saguna and Sakara God. Now, before moving on to other topics, I would like to say a few words about devotion to God without form but with attributes, Nirakara and Saguna. So we come to what is known as Nirakara Upasana, worship of the formless. Now, there are many devotees who have a predominantly intellectual bent of mind. I mean, they are more intellectual than emotional. Hinduism prescribes this form of devotion, Nirakara Upasana, to such devotees. Devotees to whom the idea of a God with form doesn't appeal. But before we continue with this, a few words of caution are necessary here. Because one has to be very, very cautious before banishing forms from one's spiritual life. Trying to do away with the forms in one's spiritual practice, both forms of God and forms of worship. That is what I mean. It is really not all that easy to just do away with them. As Swami Vivekananda says, a man may be an intellectual giant, but no more than a baby in spiritual matters. So most of us do need some kindergarten schooling. A humble devotee with a real spiritual experience, however insignificant it may be. A humble devotee with a real spiritual experience is infinitely better than a so-called Advaitin with none. Not only that, this little intellect of ours, it can never be a safe guide in spiritual matters, in things that are beyond the grasp of the senses. My mind may like an infinite God, and an infinite God cannot have finite forms. Vedanta also says that the Supreme Brahman is formless, and not only formless but also attributeless, that it has no qualities whatsoever. So, how could we even imagine that the infinite, eternal, absolute reality becomes a God, a personal God who deals out justice, who listens to prayers, and who is supposed to shower mercy on those who take refuge in Him? How are we to imagine these things? How could our intellect allow such a limitation of the limitless? That is the question. The absolute cannot be limited by form or quality. It is transcendental. It is beyond mind and speech. It cannot be an object of worship. Nobody can worship Nirguna Nirakara Brahman. But if that is so, if there is only one undivided, non-dual existence, if there is only one absolute without a second, then where have all these contradictory phenomena that we are faced with every day, the pairs of opposites like good and evil, happiness and sorrow, light and darkness, life and death. In fact, this entire creation, the world as we see it, from where have all these come? Yet, Vedanta teaches that this absolute Brahman, formless and attributeless, is the only source of all creation. If there is only one pure existence without a second, there cannot be another source. That is the truth. So, somehow, this formless, changeless Brahman, Nirguna Nirakara Brahman, becomes, or rather, appears to have become this universe. This Nirguna Nirakara Brahman appears as its ruler, Ishvara, the personal God, or Saguna Brahman. That is his Maya. But then the next question would be, if this Nirguna Brahman can express itself through all names and forms of the universe, then why can't it appear in a divine form of a deity? Why and how can we exclude that possibility? If I and you and everything in this universe is real, then why not God and the deities? Why can't the angels and heavens and hells, why are they not real? I'm only raising these questions to show how inadequate the intellect is in understanding subtle spiritual truths. So it is only to facilitate our approach to it that the Absolute appears as God in all His divine forms and blessed qualities. If we can think of Him, if we can think of God through these forms and qualities, our spiritual practice becomes that much easier. And precisely for that reason, we can also use any prescribed form of prayer or worship or meditation. There is no harm in using any of these methods. On the other hand, these things are supposed to make it easier for us to fix our mind on God. In fact, the human mind is so constituted that it cannot easily grasp abstract truths. That is the fact. It does require usually something concrete to hold on to. If it is not forms and images, then it has to be ideas and concepts. That is why even those who are, so to say, up against forms of God, even they can't altogether do away with them in actual spiritual practice. The very idea of God, addressing God as Father or Mother, thinking of God as dwelling in heaven, all these things, together with temples, rituals, and such others, everything rests entirely on concrete forms. So, all these have to be considered and weighed carefully before doing away with the worship of God through images and symbols. Otherwise, we will become mere intellectual snobs, thinking ourselves very sophisticated. But that is all right for those who don't take spiritual life seriously. But for us, spiritual aspirants, practicing spiritual aspirants, there is a great danger in that kind of empty intellectualism. It is only one step away from out and out worldliness. It might surprise you, and many don't see this danger. But that is where the mind will end up if it doesn't have anything real to hold on to for spiritual practice. The vulture soars very high, but its eyes are fixed on the charnel pit. Sri Ramakrishna's words. The vulture soars very high, but its eyes are fixed on the charnel pit. The crow, too, thinks he is a very clever bird. But the first thing that he does in the morning when he wakes up is to fill his stomach with nothing but others' filth. Sri Ramakrishna says, haven't you seen how he struts about? Very clever indeed. If you look up this part in the Gospel, Mahendranath Gupta says, as Sri Ramakrishna uttered these words, there was complete stillness in the room. Of course, these words were aimed at worldly minded Pandits. But our own mind can become like those Pandits if we overlook this danger. So we have to beware of this. Only those spiritual aspirants who have outgrown, not just given up, who have outgrown the necessity of these help that images and symbols offer, only they are qualified for Nirakara Upasana. That too, Saguna Nirakara Upasana. Even those spiritual aspirants are very rare. Spiritual life is like a ladder leading to the roof of a building. Prayer, worship, meditation, these are all the rungs of the ladder leading up to the final experience of Advaita. So the experience of Advaita is the roof. Most of us are and for a long time will be on the ladder, not on the roof. So we must focus on the steps now, although keeping in mind that our goal is the roof beyond. But now we must give our full attention to the steps. Otherwise, we might never reach the roof. But first of all, we should know where on the ladder we actually stand. That is most important. Many people want to practice Advaitic meditation. Very often, after reading a few books or hearing a few nice lectures, so many people talk about the Absolute. But what do they actually achieve on the practical side? Most of them give up after a short while. That is what happens. They find they are getting nowhere. In the case of a few others, it might take them a long time, even years of futile effort to understand that Advaita is beyond their grasp. Even that we will understand only after a long time. We forget that Advaita is a state of actual experience. The fact is, so long as we meditate, so long as there is the act of meditation and the object of meditation, even in a very subtle form, as long as we meditate, as long as there is the act of meditation and an object, it is still dualism. So, we need not bother ourselves too much about the one without a second now. We don't have to be too anxious about merging ourselves in the one now. It may take us many, many lives to attain that state. It is not what appeals to me intellectually that is important. What is more important is what I can actually do. That is why our senior Swamis say, it was their words that I quoted, a modest devotee with some real spiritual experience is infinitely better than a so-called Advaiti with no hope of any. Now, keeping all this in mind, let us try to know a few things about Nirakara Upasana or worship of the formless. It is good to know these things. There is a well-known Sanskrit verse which brings out the true spirit of worship. In that verse, the devotee prays, "O Lord, in my meditations, I have given forms to you who are formless. O teacher of the world, by singing your glory, I have denied the truth that you are beyond all speech. By describing you as specially manifested in holy places, I have denied your omnipresence. O Lord of the universe, please forgive me for this threefold fault of mutilation committed by me." I'll read the prayer once more. "O Lord, in my meditations I have given forms to you who are formless." Yeah, that is God's real nature. "O teacher of the world, by singing your glories, I have denied the truth that you are beyond all speech. By describing you as specially manifested in holy places, I have denied your omnipresence. O Lord of the universe, please forgive me for this threefold fault of mutilation." Mutilation heißt Verstümmelung oder Verschandelung. So, all worship is undertaken with one basic assumption, at least in Hindu worship, that one supreme reality exists behind all images and symbols, behind all names and forms. We have already heard this many times. In the midst of all the multiplicity, we should not forget the one which is our ultimate goal. So, the Absolute must form the background even of the forms of God we meditate on. This we have to keep in mind. We have already seen how in Bhakti Yoga, the devotee concentrates their mind and feelings on their Ishta Devata, their chosen deity or chosen ideal. Now we are talking about devotees to whom the idea of a God with form does not appeal. Saguna but Nirakara. They like to meditate on a non-anthropomorphic. Non-anthropomorphic means non-human. A non-human form of God. Say, like the ocean or the sky or a vast expanse of light or space. This is meditation on the formless, Nirakara, but formless with attributes, qualities, Saguna. So, Nirakara, Saguna. So, what are the attributes here? Here the attributes are infinity, vastness, luminosity, purity, freedom. So these would be the attributes of a formless God. But please remember, this is not Advaitic meditation. This is not Advaita, though it may be a step towards it. Meditating on an anthropomorphic chosen ideal, that is, God with human form, and meditating on God as an ocean of light, which is a non-anthropomorphic form. They are both dualistic meditations. I repeat, meditating on God with human form and meditating on God without human form but with qualities. Both of them are dualistic meditations. But perhaps the latter, that is to say, formless or impersonal meditation, is closer to the Advaitic ideal. That much can be said. To take an example, in formless meditation, I imagine that my object of worship is a vast mass of light. I meditate on a vast expanse of light, and that I myself am a small particle of light. And I visualize that both are drowned in an infinite ocean of light. And that is the light of consciousness. This is one form of formless meditation. First, I think more or less of myself alone. That is to say, my body alone. There is only an indefinite idea of the principle of consciousness standing at the back of my personality or anything else. Just an indefinite idea. Then I begin to think more and more of the principle of consciousness. I was thinking more about myself. Now I think more of the principle of consciousness and less of my own personality. When I am fairly successful in this, then I can also try to see other personalities also as points of divine light. I can try to see the divine spark living in the bodies of all, enlivening them, giving life to them. This is just one example. There are a few other types of formless meditation. One is, you may imagine you are a fish swimming in the one undivided, eternally indivisible ocean of Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. You are a fish swimming in the ocean of Brahman, without any obstruction, whatever. Another type of meditation is where you can imagine you are a bird flying in the infinite sky, without anything standing in your way anywhere. Or you are like a pot fully immersed in water. There's water inside and water outside. So, like a fish swimming freely in the infinite ocean, or a bird flying equally freely in the infinite sky, or a pot completely immersed in water, with water outside and inside. Or, as I said, you imagine yourself to be a point of light, that is self-conscious light, immersed in one indivisible ocean of light. This is for most people, this last one is more helpful because of the associations of light. Here you identify yourself with the little point of light, then you try to feel that it is a part of an infinite sphere of light. And finally, you make your point of light expand. It keeps expanding and expanding, and finally it merges in the vast light ocean. Or we could also just let this little point of light move anywhere in that infinite light ocean, because everywhere there is nothing but light. This is a wonderful form of meditation. In all these meditations, we begin with ourselves first. We begin with ourselves, but there is one vital thing we need to always remember, regardless of what kind of meditation we practice. Whether we meditate upon God with form or on the formless, what is most important is to reduce our body identification. That we have to forget. Some people don't think highly of worship of forms, worship of so-called clay images. But at the same time, they cling to their own bodies. For them, their own body is the most adorable thing in this world. In fact, that is, so to say, the worst form of idolatry that exists. And still, they feel superior because they don't worship images of clay. They analyze God's nature, but they're not willing to analyze themselves. Before we apply the concept of formlessness or impersonality to God, we must first apply it to ourselves and see how it is. In fact, this is one of the main laws of spiritual life, that our concept of reality depends upon our concept of ourselves. Swamiji humorously said, if a cow were to think of God, that God would be a huge cow. So, if we want to meditate on the formless God, we must first think of ourselves as formless. We must forget this little ego. We must depersonalize ourselves before we try to depersonalize God. This we won't do. And that is why we very often get precious nothing out of our so-called formless worship. Many people, in the name of impersonal meditation, just allow their minds to drift into sleep. When all forms, supports are taken away from a mind that is still untrained, this is what happens: sleep. So, in order to practice formless meditation, we begin with ourselves first. We have to look upon ourselves as spirit, not as bodies. We have to forget that we are bodies. So, in the midst of all these meditations, we should never forget this most important fact, that we are souls. Whether we meditate on a finite form or on the formless, we should look upon ourselves as souls. And we should always remember that God, the divine, God is vaster. He is more real than this little soul. Shankaracharya himself says in one of his less known compositions, It is the waves that merge themselves in the ocean and not the ocean in the waves. So, O Lord, when all limitations are removed from me, it is I who will lose myself in you and not you in me. It is the waves that merge themselves in the ocean, not the ocean in the waves. So, when all limitations are removed from me, it is I who will lose myself in you, O Lord, and not you in me. These are Shankaracharya's words. So now we know what class of devotees are qualified for Nirakara Upasana. It is meant for those aspirants who are really able to meditate on God's all-pervading presence. It is for them that the Shastras suggest those 3 or 4 types of formless meditation I just mentioned. And the Shastras also have suitable hymns and prayers to accompany that mode of worship. So if those who are really fit for this path persist in their sadhana with sincere bhakti, if they persist and if they are qualified to do that, they will also reach their goal just like any other bhakti yogi. There's no question of that. We usually think that worshippers of the impersonal God are emotionally dry people. That is what we generally think, that those who worship a formless God are heartless, emotionally dry. It's a very wrong belief and not at all true. The very fact that formless worship is included in Bhakti Yoga is proof that it is possible for an aspirant to love the formless with as much intensity as a devotee loves God with form. I will repeat this. It is possible for an aspirant to love the formless with as much intensity as a devotee loves God with form. Apart from fitness, this is also a question of temperament. In his Viveka Chudamani, Shankaracharya brings out this aspect of bhakti. This is also called bhakti. And this is how Shankaracharya defines bhakti. He says, among all means of liberation, devotion is supreme. Among all means of liberation, devotion is supreme. To seek earnestly to know one's own real nature, this is said to be devotion. To seek earnestly to know one's own real nature, this is devotion. Of course, this definition is from the Advaita standpoint. Here, earnestness signifies devotion, but there is not that much difference between the two. Then the Advaitins substitute the Atman, the indwelling self, for Ishvara, the Supreme Lord of the devotees. According to Narada, bhakti is intense love for God, and this divine love is immortal bliss. Bhakti is intense love for God, and this divine love is immortal bliss. By attaining it, one becomes perfect, immortal, and satisfied forever. This is how Narada defines bhakti. But however different the definitions may appear, if we reflect on them, with our background of Vedanta, we will see there is no essential difference. What Dvaitins call Ishvara, Advaitins call Atman. What Dvaitins call devotion, Advaitins call earnestness. What Dvaitins call immortality, Advaitins call liberation. In fact, one of the main qualifications required of an aspirant on the path of knowledge, one main qualification required for Jnana Marga is a burning passion for the realization of truth, a burning passion, an intense longing for liberation. One must feel as if one's head were on fire. As if one's head were on fire. That is how the books describe this passion and longing. And this is expected of somebody on the Jnana Marga also. It is an irrepressible emotional urge which unifies the aspirant's whole personality. The entire personality is unified, thinking, feeling, willing, and makes them all one-pointed. And that one-pointedness allows the Jnana Yogi to reach their goal. Without this intense one-pointedness, the Jnana Yogi becomes lost in the jungle of intellectualism. We saw that just now. They become lost, or they find comfort in mere speculative philosophy. Anyway, they fail to reach the goal. Now, in what way is this burning passion, this intense longing for to realize the truth, in what way is this different from a devotee's all-consuming love of God? There is no difference. That means Jnana Yoga is also as much a thing of the heart as of the head. It is not all head and no heart. That's a very wrong idea of Jnana Yoga. Anyhow, now at last we come to the formless and attributeless, Nirakara Nirguna aspect of God. Until now we have discussed God in his first two aspects, with form and attributes, Sakara, Saguna, and without form but with attributes, Nirakara, Saguna. Now we come to his last aspect, formless and attributeless, Nirakara, Nirguna. And here we are faced with a question. Is devotion to such a God who is absolute, who is transcendental, is devotion to such a God possible? Long ago we heard that the unconditioned Brahman cannot be the object of our prayer and worship. Because we can't establish any relationship with with it. You can't say it is he or she. You can only call it it. A relationship, especially of love, is only possible with another person. A relationship of love is possible only with another person. Or is it really so? Vedanta teachers say No, it doesn't necessarily have to be so. It is quite possible to love, to be intensely devoted to something that is impersonal. That is also possible, though it might be difficult for certain minds. We just saw how Shankaracharya's definition of bhakti brings out this dimension of love. Love expressed in the form of earnestness, single-mindedness. After all, what is bhakti? It is the individual soul's love and longing for the Supreme Soul. The individual soul's love and longing for the Supreme Soul. It doesn't have all that much to do with personalities, much less to do with bodies. The soul is essentially spirit. It is bodiless, formless spirit. By clothing that in human form, whether the spirit is individual or the supreme, by clothing spirit in human dress, so to say, Bhakti Yoga only makes spiritual life, spiritual practice natural and spontaneous for those who are more emotional by nature, that's all. And for most of us, bhakti happens to be, to put it in practical language, for most of us, bhakti happens to be the path of least resistance. So, love and devotion for an impersonal ideal is quite possible. Otherwise, this wouldn't have found a place in Bhakti Yoga. I mean, in the Bhakti Yoga chapter of Bhagavad Gita. There we find Arjuna asking Krishna, those ever steadfast devotees who worship you and those others who worship the impersonal absolute, which of them is the better yogi? Those ever-fast devotees who worship you, that is, Krishna as the personal God, and those others who worship the impersonal absolute, the Supreme Brahman, which of them are the better yogis? That means both types of yogis worship. Both of them worship, each in their own way. But we will take up this topic for discussion in our next class, because once I start with that, then 3 or 4 more minutes won't be enough. So we will end today's class here. And thank you all very much once again. Thank you very much for your participation. In fact, especially when we are discussing matters that are close to heart about devotion and God, at some point it ceases to be an academic class and becomes more of a satsang. And that is something very special. And I thank you all for giving me an opportunity to be with you and talk about these matters. Thank you very much. Our next meeting will be tomorrow afternoon at the same time. But as most of you already know, since Swami Baneshanandaji is out of station, Bhaswatananda will speak on not on Yoga Sutras or Mandukya Upanishad. He will give us a short talk on Atman and the states of consciousness. Atman and the states of consciousness. Nevertheless, as usual on Sunday afternoons, the class will be followed by half an hour's guided meditation, which will be led by Swami Baneshanandaji. We will be playing a video clip of it, so you won't miss him. Now, let us all chant Om 3 times before we disperse. Namaste once again, goodbye, and I wish you all a nice weekend. But we will meet again tomorrow. Until then, Namaste.